I had no idea I was soon to witness a tragedy that would shock the world. A tragedy that unfolded right here in Huambo on a day much like this one back in 2001. It was a sunny April day when I arrived in Angola. After bumping along dusty roads for hours, I had reached the outskirts of a town called Huambo. I was relieved to finally be getting out of the brutal heat and humidity that clung to me like a damp shirt. As a journalist, I was here to report on the unrest that still gripped Angola after decades of civil war. The war had ended in 2002, but the country remained scarred and unstable. I hoped to tell the stories of the Angolan people still struggling to rebuild their lives. But as my car crept through crowded market streets toward my hotel, I had no idea I was soon to witness a tragedy that would shock the world. A tragedy that unfolded right here in Huambo on a day much like this one back in 2001. After checking in, I dropped my bags and headed straight for the local hospital. I hoped to arrange interviews with doctors and nurses who had responded to the disaster I had come here to investigate. The sun beat down as I walked, and I could feel sweat pooling beneath my shirt. All around me, Huambo seemed lively and chaotic, with locals shopping and socializing amidst a din of car horns and music. But disturbing memories lurked beneath the surface of daily routine here. At the hospital, I sat down with a veteran nurse named Carolina. She had a sad smile and a tired look in her eyes as she recounted that fateful day. "It was April 28th, 2001, she began slowly. I was working the morning shift when we started getting word of an accident out on the railway. At first, we didn't think much of it. Train derailments were common here back then. What Carolina did not yet know was that the mangled train cars and billowing smoke visible in the distance signaled a disaster far beyond any she had encountered before. An overloaded train had derailed just outside of town while illegally transporting several hundred people hidden in its freight wagons. The Angola Railroad did not officially allow passenger transport, but impoverished locals often risked their lives by riding clandestinely like this. On that morning, their gamble ended in catastrophe. As the hours wore on, the true scale of the accident became clear. Injured victims began stumbling from the wreck site or were carried in by good Samaritans. Many were bloody and dazed, their clothes ripped and faces caked in dust and tears. The hospital descended into chaos as more arrived by the minute. Every bed and hallway soon filled with the moaning and writhing of the broken passengers dumped onto the floors. Carolina's face was pained as she recalled how helpless she felt to offer anything but meager first aid. The hospital was overwhelmed almost immediately by the sheer number of wounded. Medical supplies quickly ran out, and a dire lack of ambulances, many simply died, untended, on the roadside. All Carolina could do was offer spare rags to stem bleeding and precious gulps of water to the crying, desperate victims. As I left the hospital, the scorching Angolan sun now seemed to beat down with an ominous weight. Caroline's account had painted a vivid picture of the hellish scenes that played out here in the aftermath of the derailment. But there was more I needed to understand. I flagged down a taxi and headed for the train station, where railway workers might remember more details. The station was busy with travelers heading to and from the capital, Luanda. Porter boys shouted for business, and hawkers moved amongst the crowd selling snacks from baskets on their heads. At the ticket counter, I met an elderly guard named Bernardo who had witnessed the wreck. As we sat on a bench beside the tracks, he described the chaos he saw that day. Bernardo was used to seeing stowaways sneak onto freight trains leaving Huambo. But on the morning of April 28th, he noticed scores clambering into the cars. There were so many hiding in each wagon, he recalled uncomfortably. Packages and sacks covered the doors, but near 300 must have been inside. Bernardo regretfully admitted turning a blind eye, not wanting to get involved. Later that day, those packed freight wagons would be launched from the tracks like toy boxes. Most inside stood no chance of survival. But in the morning sunlight, the train pulled away like any other routine shipment, rumbling west with its secret human cargo. Only when Bernardo's radio crackled with confused reports of an accident did the awful truth emerge. My next stop was the site of the wreck itself, several miles outside of Huambo. I hitched a ride out there with a trucker named Raul who remembered the derailment. As we bounced down the dusty rural road, he confirmed much of what I had already heard. "No one knows why it went off the rails," Raul told me. "Could have been the speed, weight, or even guerrillas sabotaging the tracks." but everyone agrees there were too many people hidden inside. We arrived at last at a desolate, overgrown section of rail. It was easy to spot. The metal tracks were twisted and ruptured where several cars had plowed into the ground. Raul dropped me off, promising to return before sunset. As his truck disappeared in a cloud of dust, I gazed uneasily at the wreck site. The atmosphere was ghostly, as if it remained haunted by past suffering. For hours, I poked around the wreckage, trying to imagine the calamity that unfolded here. The wheels, axles, and carriage frames had been salvaged long ago, but bits of broken glass, tattered luggage, and other debris still littered the area. The true horror lay in picturing hundreds trapped within the crumpling train cars. Bernardo estimated over 250 died, but the exact number was never known. Most victims were likely impoverished Angolans who couldn't afford proper tickets. They died anonymous deaths far from home, their identities never recorded. As Angola's civil war left many living in poverty, people were forced to risk the railroads for illegal travel. For them, the wreck spelled a tragic end to their search for a better life. Evening was approaching when Raul's truck finally returned in a cloud of dust. As we jostled back towards Huambo, I reflected on all I had witnessed. The disaster underscored how many Angolans continued struggling even after war's end. It showed how the desperation of poverty could drive people to risk everything for a chance to get ahead. The train wreck was more than an isolated tragedy. It was part of Angola's broader story of hardship in the wake of conflict. Back in my hotel room that night, I gazed out at Huambo's lights flickering to life. The city seemed deceptively calm and quiet now. But the interviews and sites I had visited left me pondering the fragility of normality after catastrophe. Even a decade later, the collective trauma of what happened that April morning lingered just below the surface. I'm Sam, a journalist, and my investigation was a search for truth and understanding. But it had also unearthed the raw pain of those still mourning loved ones lost so needlessly. Their only solace was trying to make sense of it all, rebuilding lives torn asunder in a few terrifying moments of chaos. Out of such anguish, there could only be the faintest glimmer of hope for a better future.